An Ontario man given 15 years to live spent 11 of them fighting to prove his job made him sick.
For 20 years, Mitch LaPrade worked in the printing industry. But in 2006, a devastating diagnosis.
Chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a terminal blood cancer.
His doctors gave him 15 years to live, and they told him his illness was caused by exposure to a dangerous substance.
Benzene, a cancer-causing chemical in the solvents he used at work.
He turned to the Ontario Workers' Compensation Bureau for help. Firefighters who developed the same cancer after years on the job are covered because benzene is found in smoke. But LaPrade was told the same didn't apply to him.
He submitted medical studies and received denials in return, with WSIB arguing he had inadequate evidence.
11 years after he started fighting, LaPrade has now finally won the right to compensation. CBC News producer Chelsea Gomez first started working on this story a year ago. Okay, so let's begin with the sort of contrast there that doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. Why would firefighters be covered if they develop this illness, but not anyone else?
So the interesting part about the firefighters, first of all, is that they're very well organized and they have a great union behind them that backs them, that fought for this for years. And Ontario, when they passed the legislation in Ontario to cover the firefighters and all their illnesses, it wasn't the first province. Manitoba had been doing it for years, and so it was sort of following suit with all the other provinces. But what Ontario was very cautious about was not actually including the list of chemicals that firefighters are exposed to. So they have a list of cancers and other diseases that firefighters are covered for, but not chemicals. So when Mitch started to argue his case and started to find out that he was linked to benzene, there was a lot of pushback from the board about, well, benzene doesn't necessarily cause your type of leukemia. And on top of that, there's been no studies in the printing industry, which is true. There's very few studies in the printing industry, but there's definitely a lot more studies in the firefighting industry that shows the links between benzene and leukemia.
We get emails from people every day, all day, phone calls saying, can you do something about my story? A lot of people will say that they're frustrated about workplace issues. We can't do them all. Mm-hmm. What is it about this one that you thought deserved the attention of news media?
Initially, when we got the email from Mitch, what struck me was that this man had been given like 15 years to live, and he had fought for, I think it was 10, 11 years at that point, to prove that his disease was caused by his work. So I thought, first of all, he's convinced, and his doctors are convinced. So let me look more into this. So he sent me documents, and when I looked through everything, the one thing that really stood out was this complete contrast between the firefighters and him, and why does an everyday person have to actually fight to prove something, that there's a precedent for it, and it's already acknowledged that leukemia and his type of leukemia could be caused from work and exposure. So to me, that was what made the impact for me and why I thought the story needed to be told.
When you said he sent you some documents, I mean, that's the other thing, is that when people have been engaged in a battle with a government agency, an organization, especially for one that drags on years, when they say, I'm going to send you some documents, it's not bullet points, it's banker's bucks. It's stuff that you now have to wade through and separate yourself from their beliefs, because we're not there to be their advocate so much as to tell the story or to illustrate an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So he sent me this massive box of stuff, and it's not everything that he has. He has tons of stuff still at home, but it's sort of like the key points in his story and the decisions and the denials and what they were arguing in some of the studies that he had submitted. So for me to go through that, I definitely had to organize it, put it all together, but then also drill into what exactly were these studies saying, and were they really saying benzene caused his leukemia, and were his doctors arguing nothing else, and what were the rebuttals from the WSIB, because it's important to know what they were saying in return, because they also had their medical consultants in-house that were looking at these studies.
And the story aired earlier this week, and since then he's gotten his checks.
He's got some checks, yeah. So he got a call from his case manager the day after we went to air saying, so I have some checks in the mail for you. They'll be there by 5 p.m. tomorrow. So he has received some compensation for his lost time earnings, which is one portion of your compensation with WSIB. The other portion will be non-economic loss, which is like pain and suffering. And that's still up for debate, and it's right now he has a lot of questions about how they're calculating that.
Thanks for this.
You're welcome.